Las Vegas is a city known for glamour, glitz, and gambling, with a tourist attraction around every corner. But that's not the reality for many of its residents. In the early 2000s, a group of security guards came to know the underbelly of the city of sin quite well. They were given sidearms, bicycles, and badges, and a pay rate of $8 per hour. Their job was simple. All they had to do was go up against one of the most notorious and violent street gangs in American history, and to prevent its members from making a living through their primary income from the sale of crack cocaine. Known as the Playboy Bloods, this gang had taken over an apartment complex known as the Jetz. They were armed to the teeth with M16 assault rifles, shotguns, and semi-automatic pistols. And they had little trouble intimidating local residents to fall in line. The predictable outcome was the tragic murder of a man who came to Las Vegas to pursue his dreams, but instead found nothing but debt, indignities, and a shockingly violent death. His killing would go on to expose the crack side of Las Vegas, which exists largely outside the view of the millions of tourists who come and go each year. Today, we'll be delving into some of this reality that most never get to see. It's the story of how the Playboy Bloods made their deadly mark on the city through drug sales, casino robberies, and a social code that rewarded ruthlessness with prestige and power. This is the Killer Chronicles. It was the night of January 20th, 2004. Security guards Brian Wilcox and Jordan Boyd were out on patrol, pedaling around an apartment complex known as the headquarters for a subset of the Bloods, called the Playboys. Responding to constant complaints about drug sales and shootings, the property management had hired a company called Guardian Security Incorporated to field the area with armed bicycle patrols who were tasked with identifying so-called trespassers and drug dealers and to kick them out. This security force was outgunned and generally not respected by the Playboy Bloods, who treated the guards more like an opposing gang than a police force. Like many who had come to Las Vegas, Brian Wilcox had migrated to the city, hoping to fulfill his dream of becoming a successful DJ. A native of St. Louis Park, Minnesota, Wilcox had made a name for himself under the stage name DJ Willie Will, and had come to Vegas at a friend's suggestion, believing that this was the next natural career step for him. Things hadn't gone the way he planned, and now here he was, yet another aspiring DJ with a day job. Guardian's security was also ridden with financial problems and accusations that they weren't paying overtime owed to employees, who were given the option to buy a bulletproof vest out of a portion of their salary. Wilcox had hoped to purchase a vest in this way, but was still accruing enough to earn one. His family back home in Minnesota had been trying to convince him to give it all up and come home, but Wilcox had responded that he was simply in too much debt. The apartment complex at the intersection of Doolittle Avenue and H Street rests 7 miles from the Las Vegas Strip. It is known to many as the Sherman Gardens Annex Apartments. But to those who live there, it is more commonly referred to as the Jetz, the main turf associated with the Playboy Bloods, though a lot of its members didn't actually live there. While many people associate the Las Vegas Bloods with Suge Knight's very public entrance into the city during the 1990s, Vegas is actually one of the first regions to where the Bloods migrated after forming in the early 1970s in Los Angeles. According to police, the Playboys were founded during the late 70s or early 80s, allegedly by a man named Ricky Cooper. Ricky Dennis Cooper had spent most of his adult life behind bars, after, in 1983, being arrested for the shooting death of a man named Ricky Williams during an argument near the Seven Seas Fish Market in Las Vegas. At the time, prosecutors referred to him as a, quote, hooligan, who founded the Playboy Gang and who served as an OG on the west side of Vegas. For years after his conviction, Cooper maintained that he'd been falsely implicated in the murder by a single unreliable witness. Back then, the Jetz were known as the Weaver Projects. But other than that, the gang was basically the same as it would be 20 years later. The Playboy Bloods use a red Playboy bunny as a symbol and a hand sign that somewhat resembles a rabbit, which is known as throwing up the head. They sometimes refer to one another as P, or attach the letter P at the end of nicknames. As many Bloods commonly do, the Playboys will attach the letter B sounds to letter C sounding letters, which the Crips conversely also tend to do with words that begin with the letter B. As one former Playboy testified, quote, "Instead of saying sit back, we might say bit back. Instead of saying kick him, we might say bick him. Instead of saying cigarette, we might say biggerette. Instead of saying what's up, we might say suwoop," which is Swahili for hello. The gang structure is simply reputationally based, with everyone being known as some form of gangster. Younger and inexperienced members are known as BGs, or baby gangsters, and the sliding scale continues thusly. It goes to YGs, or young gangsters, to just gangsters to OGs, or original gangsters, who have more power to order others around. But this system is somewhat fluid and tenuous. If someone who is rising the ranks of the Bloods shows genuine weakness, especially in a situation involving rivals, he risks losing his status or even being kicked out of the gang if it's bad enough. Similarly, any illicit drug business must be backed up with muscle, as drug dealers obviously can't sue over unpaid debts. Over the years, the Playboys have had rivalries with the Rolling 60s Crips, the Donna Park Crips, the Piru Bloods, and the Garrison Park Kingsmen, but have also enjoyed peaceful periods with some of these gangs. In the 2000s, the Playboys had accrued plenty of muscle and grown their numbers enough to form an elite subgroup within the gang, known as the Full Throttle Clique. Playboy OGs supposedly included men like Fred Nix, aka June P., Anthony Mabry, aka Akim Slim, Sebastian Wigg, aka Rock, Delvin Ward, aka D-Love, and most notably, Queza Burns, a lifelong Blood known as a natural leader who commanded respect from other gangsters, ran trap houses around Vegas, and as one Playboy put it, tolerated no bullshit. While the gang operated illegal affairs around Vegas, they were strongest at the Jetz, where members had been able to take over apartments of various drug addicts and operate out of those residences, much to the chagrin of the local bicycle security squad. Conflicts between guards and gangsters became common in the weeks leading up to January 20th, 2004. But on that night, things got a lot worse. Brian Wilcox and his partner were responding to a report of a disturbance at 1723 Curran Way, where they found 4 Playboy Bloods members lurking in the area, including at least 2 who had been kicked out for alleged drug sales multiple times. Wilcox told the group to leave, and they responded with death threats. The 2 guards could sense that things were getting ugly fast. They decided to retreat, hopping onto their bicycles and pedaling away to give the group some time to cool down. As they did so, shots rang out, and Wilcox was struck in the back and the leg. He fell off his bike, mortally wounded. He was pronounced dead later that night. In his grief, Wilcox's father would later reveal to the media that he had been trying to convince his son to come back home to Minnesota and to leave his dangerous job behind. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Force was accustomed to investigating violence at the Jetz, and they were also used to shootings with dozens of eyewitnesses who somehow, quote, didn't see anything. But the threats and violence against security guards by Playboys at the Jetz had all been well documented. Wilcox and others had been spat on, threatened, had rocks and bottles thrown at them, and in a prior incident, one Playboy Blood named Marquette Tillman had yelled, "You white honkies ain't gonna push me off this property again." Before long, one area resident who wasn't affiliated with the Playboys made a statement to police, but promptly received threats and intimidation for their cooperation. Just 6 days earlier, police had been called to a different part of Las Vegas to investigate the fatal shooting of a Crip named Brandon Crosby, and they'd falsely believed that Marquette Tillman was responsible. Known by the nickname Ketty P, Tillman was quickly cleared of shooting Crosby, which was later attributed to a Bloods member from California. But Tillman was hardly innocent. After Crosby's murder, he shot up a block containing 4 eyewitnesses. While investigating that crime, police began to build evidence linking Tillman to Brian Wilcox's murder, too. Before long, Tillman was arrested, pleaded not guilty, and went to trial in 2005. Prosecutors were confident that they'd be victorious. But things went south for them when Wilcox's own partner security guard failed to identify Tillman as the shooter from the witness stand. In the end, Tillman was acquitted. That's when the feds decided to step in. Nevada state prosecutors had no problem placing Tillman at the scene of the crime. But there were at least 3 other playboys present, and the defense could easily argue that any of them could have been armed and shot in the fracas. But if Tillman was charged with the murder under the RICO statute, federal prosecutors wouldn't have that problem. In a sweeping indictment against 10 Playboy Bloods, prosecutors charged not just Tillman, but another Playboys member named Stephen Booth with participating in Wilcox's murder under the RICO statute, with others who were charged with crack sales and various unrelated crimes of violence. But Wilcox wasn't the only person whose death was blamed on the Playboys. In late 2004, the gang had lost one of its OGs, Queza Burns. His killing remains unsolved to this day, but it was widely believed that Burns had been set up by a rival gang member. Queza was in his vehicle in Naked City when a man pulled up and asked to buy some rocks. When Queza reached for the crack and took his eyes off the other person for a split second, that's when he was gunned down. In the hours after his shooting, the Playboys gathered, deeply upset, and also out for revenge, and headed out to the Pecos Terrace apartments, known as a Crip hangout. Who they found inside, instead, was Billy Ray Thomas, a man who was out at 4 a.m. desperately attempting to fix his sister's car in time for her to make it to work later that morning, but who was also wearing blue sweatpants. When they saw him, Reginald Dunlop called out, "What's up, cuz?" an informal greeting amongst Crips. Thomas said what's up and turned around, but the greeting had been a ruse. The Playboys opened fire. Thomas was struck 8 times and died. Police initially assumed the killers had been anybody murderers, a Crip set in the area. But after those leads went nowhere, they charged a Playboy named Ja'Cory Taylor with the homicide. At Ja'Cory's trial, he relied on the testimony of Stephen Booth, who had pleaded guilty without cooperating, and insisted that Ja'Cory was too injured from nursing a gunshot wound to his leg to have participated in a murder around that time. Ja'Cory also testified in his own defense, quote, "I was not over there. I had nothing to do with that. I was not over there. I had absolutely nothing to do with the murder, with what happened. I had nothing to do with that. Absolutely nothing to do with that." Jurors didn't believe him. Taylor was convicted, not only of murder, but also of a takeover robbery at the Klondike Casino, where he and Jesse Cooper went in with a revolver and an M16, made off with cash, but crashed their getaway car. Taylor was later sentenced to life. As for Ricky Cooper, the man allegedly behind the Playboys, he was recently released from prison following a public campaign for commutation. Marquette Tillman's trial would have probably included similar witnesses to Taylor's, but just 2 days into the trial, he agreed to plead guilty for more than 20 years in prison. He would later try and fail to claim his attorneys swindled him into taking the deal, then gave an emotional statement where he insisted that he was simply a product of his environment and innocent of the murder. Quote, "I went to school seeing crack pipes and crack vials. I knew nothing else. Nobody instilled a work ethic. My mother didn't work. My dad was in prison my whole life. He just passed away from a crack-induced heart attack. I never had an option. After listening to a statement from Brian Wilcox's sister, in which she said that the murder had destroyed her family and ruined her life, it was U.S. District Judge Kent Dawson's turn to speak. He was unmoved by Tillman's words. Quote, Mr. Tillman has fathered 6 children by 3 different women. He claims that he was supporting them, but support goes beyond providing money derived from criminal activity. It includes setting an example, going to work every day so that his children can see that in spite of his maybe humble employment, he's trying to set an example in abiding by the law. Tillman is scheduled to be released from prison in 2030. Despite all of the tragedy in this story, it ends with a glimmer of hope. In 2012, the city of Las Vegas launched a so-called Safe Village initiative, targeting violence specifically at Sherman Gardens and places like it. It was a partnership between police, clergymen, social workers, and everyday citizens. To those who spoke publicly about the program in 2012, it marked a drastic turning point for an area known for shootings and crack sales, to something much more positive.
Pretty proud of him. He did pretty good for himself, you know. That's just the way he was. He liked helping everybody.